Hi, readers. We are reading Chapter 7 together of The Lemonade War. It's crazy to think, but we're almost already halfway through this book. I believe there is about 13 chapters? 14 chapters. So after this chapter, we are exactly halfway through this book already. That's crazy. All right, so Chapter 7 is called Location, Location, Location. And the definition is real estate term that refers to the position of a piece of real estate as it relates to the value of that real estate. Evan was in trouble. So far, he'd earned $47.11, which was more money than he'd ever had in his whole life. But today was Friday. There was only 3 days left. 3 days to beat Jesse. He needed to earn almost $53 to win the bet, and that meant each day he had to earn. Evan tried to do the math in his head. 53 divided by 3, 53 divided by 3, he said, scratching his head. His brain spun like a top. He didn't know where to begin. He went to his desk, pulled out a piece of paper, the back of his basketball schedule from last winter, and flipped it to the back. He found a stub of a pencil in his desk bottom drawer. On the paper he wrote 53 divided by 3. He stared and stared at the equation on the page. The number 53 was just too big, and he didn't know how to do it. Jesse would know how, he muttered, scribbling hard on the page. Jessie would do some long division thing or something. Jessie had her multiplication facts memorized, and all the way up to 14 times 14. Jessie would look at the problem just like that and do it in her head like snap. Evan felt his mouth getting tight, his fingers gripping the pencil too hard, as he scribbled a dark storm cloud on the page. His math papers from school were always covered in X's. Nobody else got as many X's as he did. Nobody. Do you ever feel like that sometimes? I think with math, a lot of people do. And I remember when I was about his age, fourth grade, even all the way up until high school, I was terrible at math. I was just not confident in it. I didn't understand it. It just didn't click for me until my senior year of high school. And so eventually it did click, and now math and I were buddies. I like math, and I can appreciate math and get excited about it and feel confident in it. But just because at one point you feel like you're terrible at something doesn't mean you're always going to be terrible at it. I didn't give up. I kept trying. There were certain times I really wanted to give up and just not do math ever again, but that's not an option. And so I kept going, and now I like math. So it's possible for anybody. Anyway, draw a picture, Mrs. DeFanzio's voice floated in his head. She'd always reminded him to draw a picture when he couldn't figure out how to start a math problem. A picture of what? He asked in his head. Anything, came the answer. Anything? Yes, anything, as long as there are 53 of them. Dollar signs. Evan decided to draw dollar signs. He started to draw 3 rows of dollar signs. 1, 2, 3, he counted. 4, 5, 6, he drew. By the time he reached 53, his page looked like this. There were 17 dollar signs in each row, and then those 2 had extra dollar signs left over. Evan drew a ring around those 2 extras. 17 dollar signs and 2 left over. He stared at the picture for a long time. He wrote Friday next to the first row, Saturday next to the second row, and Sunday next to the third row. There we go. Evan looked at the picture, and it started to make sense. He needed to make $17 on Friday, $17 on Saturday, and $17 on Sunday. And somewhere over the 3 days, he needed to make 2 extra bucks in order to earn $53 by Sunday evening. Evan's heart jumped in his chest. He had done it. He'd figured out that 53 divided by 3, that was a 4th grade problem. That was 4th grade math. And he hadn't even started 4th grade. And no one had helped him. Not his mom, not Grandma, not Jessie. He had done it all by himself. It was like shooting and winning a basket in double overtime. He hadn't felt this good since the lemonade war had begun. But $17 in a day, how was he going to do that? Yesterday he'd made $45, but that was because he'd had help and free supplies from his friends. They weren't going to want to run a lemonade stand every day, especially on the last days of summer vacation. He needed a plan. something that would guarantee good sales. The weather was holding out and was for sure, and that was for sure. It was going to be 95 degrees today, a real scorcher. People who would be thirsty, all right. Evan closed his eyes and imagined a crowd of thirsty people all waving dollar bills at him. Nowhere was he going to find a lot of thirsty people, or now, where was he going to find a lot of thirsty people with money to spend? An idea popped in Evan's head. Yep, it was perfect. He just needed to find something with wheels to get him there. It took Evan half an hour to drag his loaded wagon into the town center, a distance he usually traveled in less than 5 minutes by bike, but once he knew he was there, it was worth it. It was lunchtime, and the shaded branches on the town green were filled with people sprawling out in the heat. Workers from nearby stores on their half-hour lunch breaks, moms out with their kids, old people who didn't want to be cooped up in their houses all day, high school kids on skateboards slooshed by, preschoolers climbed on the life-size sculpture, dogs lay under trees, their tongues hanging out in a pant, pant, pant way. Evan surveyed the scene and picked his spot, right in the center of the green where all the paths met. Anyone walking across the green would have to pass his stand, and now who could resist lemonade on a hot day like this? But first he wheeled his wagon off to the side, parking it under a huge rhododendron. Then he crossed the street and walked into the Big Dipper. The frozen air felt good on his skin. It was like getting dunked in a vat of just melted ice cream, and it smells a mix of vanilla, chocolate, caramel, coconut, bubblegum. He looked at the tubs of ice cream all in a row, carefully protected by the glass pane. The money in his pocket tingled. He had plenty of leftover after buying 5 cans of lemonade with his earnings from yesterday. What would hurt to buy just 1 cone or a milkshake? Maybe both. "Can I help you?" said the woman behind the counter. Yeah, said Evan. He stuck out his hand in his pocket and felt all the money. The bills and coins ruffled between his fingers. Money was meant to be spent. Why not spend a little? Evan could just imagine how that good the ice cream would feel sliding down his hot throat. Creamy, sweet, like cold, golden deliciousness. He let his mind float as he gazed at the swirly buckets of ice cream. The sound of laughter brought him back into the earth in a hurry. He looked around. It was just some girls that he didn't know at the water fountain, but it had sounded like Megan Moriarty. Can you please tell me how much a glass of lemonade cost?" $3, said the woman. "Really?" said Evan. "That much? How big's the cup?" The woman pulled a plastic cup off the stack and held it up. It wasn't much bigger than the 8 ounces Evan had in his wagon. "Wow, $3. That's a lot," said Evan. "Well, thanks anyway," he said as he started to walk towards the door. "Hey," said the woman, pointing to the ice cream case. "I'm allowed to give you a free taste." "Really?" said Evan. "Then, could I taste the strawberry one?" The woman handed a tiny plastic spoon with 3 licks worth of ice cream. Evan swallowed it all in one gulp. Back outside, he got to work. First, he filled the pitchers with water from the drinking fountain, and then he stirred in the mix. Then he pulled out the big blue marker he wrote on paper and wrote $2 per cup, best price in town. He'd barely finished setting up when customers started to line up, and they didn't stop. For a full hour, he poured lemonade. The world is a thirsty place, he thought, as he nearly emptied his 4th pitcher of the day, and I am the lemonade king. Later, Evan would think of something grand in his mind. Pride goeth before a fall. When Evan looked up, there was Officer Ken, his hands on his hips. He looked down on him. Evan gulped. He stared at the large holster on Officer Ken's belt. "Hello," said Officer Ken, not smiling. "Hi," said Evan. Officer Ken did the bike redo every year at Evan's school. He also was the cop that had shown up last fall when there was a hurt goose on the recess field. Officer Ken was always smiling. Why isn't he smiling now? Evan wondered. "Do you have a permit?" asked Officer Ken. He had a very deep voice, and when he talked quietly, like he did now. "You mean like a bike permit? That's what the rodeo was all about. If they passed the rodeo, the third graders got their bike permits, which meant that we were allowed to ride our bikes to school. No, I mean a permit for selling food and beverages in a public space. You need a permit from the town hall and pay a fee for the privilege. Pay the town hall to run a lemonade stand? Was he kidding? Evan looked at Officer Ken's face. He didn't look like he was kidding. I didn't know I needed one, said Evan. Sorry, friend, I'm gonna have to shut you down. It's the law. But there are lemonade stands all over town, said Evan. He thought of Jesse and Megan's lemonade stand. When he'd wheeled by there an hour ago, their stand had looked like a beehive, with small kids crowding around. He had read the sign. It said free face painting, nail polishing, hair braiding. What a gimmick, but it sure looked like it was working. You know, said Evan, there's a stand on Damon Road right now. You should go bust them. Officer Ken smiled. We tend to look the other way in residential neighborhoods, but right here on the town green, we have to enforce the law. Otherwise, we'd have someone selling something every 2 feet. But there had to be some way to convince Officer Ken. But how could Evan do that? You see, I've got this little sister, and we've got a competition going to see who can sell the most lemonade. And I've got to win because she's... He couldn't explain the rest. About 4th grade, about how embarrassed he was to be in the same class as his kid sister, and how it made him feel like a great big loser. Evan looked up at Officer Ken. Officer Ken looked down at Evan. It was not like Officer Ken was wearing a mask, a no smiling, I'm not your buddy mask. Then Officer Ken shook his head and smiled, and the mask fell off. I've got a little sister too, he said. Love her to death, now. But when we were kids, Officer Ken sucked in his breath and shook his head. Whew. Then the mask came back, and Officer Ken looked right at Evan for 10 very stern seconds. Tell you what, said Officer Ken, I do have to shut you down. The law's the law. But before I do, I'll buy one last glass of lemonade. How's that sound? Evan's face fell. Sure, he said without enthusiasm. He poured an extra tall cup and gave it to the policeman. Officer Ken reached into his pocket and handed Evan a $5 bill. Keep the change, he said. A contribution to the Big Brother Foundation. Now, clean up your things and don't leave any litter behind. He lifted his cup and toast as he walked away. Evan watched him go. Wow, he thought, I just sold the most expensive cup of lemonade in town. Evan stared at the $5 bill in his hand. It was funny. 2 days ago, he would have felt as rich as a king with that money in his hands. It was enough to buy 2 slices of pizza and a soda with his friends. It was enough to rent a video and have a late night at someone's house. It was enough to buy a whole bag full of his favorite candy mix at CVS. 2 days ago, he would have been jumping for joy. Now he looked at the $5 and thought, it's nothing. Compared to the $100 he needed to win the war, $5 was nothing. He felt somehow as though he'd been robbed of something, maybe the happiness he should have been feeling. He loaded everything from his stand into the wagon, making sure he didn't leave a scrap of litter behind. He still had a glass full of lemonade left in one pitcher, not to mention a whole nother pitcher already mixed up and unsold, so he poured himself a full cup. Then, before beginning the long, hot haul back to his house, he found an empty spot on the shaded bench and pulled his earnings out of his pockets. He counted once, he counted twice, very slowly. He had made $65. The cups and lemonade had cost $9. When he added up his earnings from Wednesday and Thursday, he had $103.11. Now that's enough, he thought. And we just reached page 100. So that's the end of chapter 7. Join me tomorrow for chapter 8, and we'll see where this story takes us.